Welcome to Northwest Tech Show. I'm Dave Duncan, and this is a show where we talk about technology and how a better understanding of it can help you have better outcomes at home, at work, and in your civic engagements. We're going to kick things off, as we like to do, with a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at Twit TV.
This is Twit.
State of Texas is not waiting till Elon gets Twitter to regulate with the new Texas social media content moderation law. We had Mike Masnov on Twig on Friday. He sent me an email, or maybe he tweeted this after the show, saying, I had just read about the decision. There was an injunction that kept the law from being enforced that the 5th District overturned and said, oh, no, go ahead. And it had just happened, and Mike Masnov came on Twig. We were talking about it. He said, I was not clear how awful, how messed up this law really is. He says, I don't think most people actually understand just how truly effed up and obviously unconstitutional the law is. I'm going to let our official internet lawyer weigh in on this, although Mike, I think, is also a law school graduate. I don't know if he ever practiced. The law declares social media platforms common carriers, which they're clearly not. Why is common carriers important, Denise? What does that even mean?
It's something like the telephone company would be a common carrier. And they're regulated differently by the FCC.
Well, didn't the FCC say
yes,
that internet service providers are not common carriers? So net neutrality didn't apply?
They've gone back and forth under different administrations.
Depending on what they wanted to do, yeah.
Yes. Our current status is they are not common carriers as far as the FCC is concerned.
The reason that's important is you don't tell the phone company.
Yes.
This is what the Fifth Circuit
Yes.
was saying. Well, the phone company is not allowed to listen in on your conversations and say, we're going to ban you because you're giving bad COVID information. And since you're a common carrier, Twitter, you shouldn't be able to either.
Right. And
That's just nuts.
That is nuts, but that's not what anybody has to decide at this point. What was in place was an injunction preventing this law from going into effect until a court actually had the opportunity to have briefing and argument and decide those questions. And it's the court that's going to make those decisions, the district court that's hearing this case in Texas, that issued that injunction. The Attorney General in Texas appealed that injunction to the Fifth Circuit, which is a very conservative circuit, appellate circuit of our federal appellate system. And that court undid the injunction. So the plaintiffs in the case who are challenging the law are actually now going to ask the Supreme Court to weigh in and say, hey, this injunction was in place and it should remain in place. This law shouldn't go into effect because there is irreparable harm that will happen to, I suppose they'll say, a whole segment of the commercial landscape if this law does go into effect. So we'll have to see if the Supreme Court decides to weigh in and reinstate the injunction. That is a thing that could happen. It is an unusual thing for the Supreme Court to do, to second guess the decisions of courts below it on the question of whether there's been irreparable harm or there's the threat of irreparable harm. So we'll just have to see. That could happen. But in the meantime, the appellate court that oversees this trial court has decided, hey, let's just go ahead and let this thing
Let's see what happens.
be the law.
Yeah, let's just see what happens.
Yes, while it is being challenged on constitutional grounds. And what might wind up happening is all of the arguments for how unwieldy the law is and all of its negative impact may wind up playing out while the case is actually pending, so that the plaintiffs can actually make some concrete arguments. Hey, we were going to say that this was likely to happen. Now you can see that it's happening. So it might actually wind up helping the plaintiff's case to get the law declared unconstitutional.
So there's and Mike Masnov refers to this, a good thread on Twitter, of course, by Pope Hat, who, despite his name, is actually a litigator named Ken White. not the Pope. And he says this is why this is an issue. The anti-censorship provision of the Texas law says that any site with more than 50 million monthly active users can't censor based on the viewpoint of a person or the person's content. So you cannot censor somebody on their viewpoint or how they express it. What you can censor, well, you can censor content that's illegal. Okay, that's a fairly narrow range, although this sounds a little bit like what Elon Musk was proposing. And the site can censor other things, but it doesn't say exactly what those are, which means pretty much, according to Ken, that every single moderation decision will be up for a lawsuit. That it just opens it up.
Yes. So you can imagine that if all that starts to play out while this case is pending and the lawyers are drafting arguments about its constitutionality and appropriateness and validity, that they may wind up with a lot more evidence on their hands for the court to consider. And remember, this court actually granted an injunction that prevented this law from taking effect.
But then it raises a question, well, even if this court rules in favor of overturning the law, the Fifth Circuit could then take it on appeal and overturn it down the road, since they've already indicated they're kind of in favor of it.
They've already indicated, and they didn't publish an opinion, but there is a transcript of the argument that undid this injunction. And they've indicated they really don't understand very much about the internet, how the internet works, what Twitter is, what's a common carrier, what's an internet service provider, what is a website. So, yeah, I don't have a whole lot of faith in the Fifth Circuit even really understanding these issues well enough to reach a good decision here.
Denise, I'm not even a simple country lawyer, and reading this, I've got no law background. I've tried to stay up on the issues, and I read this, and it just feels blatantly unconstitutional
because of the First Amendment.
7 ways from Friday, right? Like so many different ways. Like it seems so prima facie. I look at it, I'm like, I have no specialized expertise, but just the basic phrases in the law that are used, the kind of imposition it puts on private companies, the way in which it imposes a government mandate. I mean, it feels like they're trying to take aspects of the sue to prevent abortion law and apply it to content
this
too.
Is
like
the Texas
shoehorned
This
in there
is the new Texas way of doing business, isn't it? The Texas law lets any aggrieved user sue if they think the site censored improperly. This is according to Ken White, and get attorney fees and costs if they win. Yeah. If the Texas law stands, he says, there's no more saying it's Twitter's First Amendment right to moderate. This is where it's confusing, because on the one hand, people say, well, it's my First Amendment right to say anything I want on Twitter. That is not the case. The First Amendment says government shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Congress.
And Twitter's not the government.
Twitter's not the government. So in effect, it would be saying you have a First Amendment right with Twitter that they can't moderate. But no social site, no site, our chat room, our forums would survive. They would all turn into 4chan or 8kun if you couldn't moderate.
Yeah.
You need to be able to moderate, if only to say you can't use the F word. I mean, you need to be able to do that. And you don't even need Section 230 to allow us to do that. We're private businesses running our own private social networks. Maybe the point is that Twitter has now this is Elon's point, some higher standing as the public, marketplace of ideas or something.
You'd need something more than the state of Texas proclaiming that.
Right.
You'd need something at the federal level. You'd need congressional legislation. And by the way, I guess this is just a good time to encourage everyone. We have primaries coming up, and there are congressional seats at stake. Please look at your potential representatives and try and research what they know about the internet, what they know about privacy laws, because it's important that they understand these
I agree 100%. And of course, Roe v. Wade is also up, and there's so many issues that we really, but I have to say, I also understand how hard it is for voters. We're in California, Denise, we got a 4-page ballot with for controller and judges and sheriffs, a lot of people we've never heard of. The amount of research. I don't know how many candidates for governor are there in California. It looks like a dozen. There's your ballot.
My ballot.
And
yes, which
and
I just
so,
started filling out.
Unless you're going to go by the yard signs, or maybe you're really sophisticated and you're going to wait till you get a card from the Democratic or Republican Party telling you how to vote, you've got a lot of research ahead.
You do. So prioritize the research about your potential congressional representatives, I guess is what I'm saying, because...
Yeah, but then we got governor, lieutenant governor, comptroller, secretary of state. Yeah. We got assembly. We've got legislature. We've got... It just goes on and on and on. And I could see how voters are just overwhelmed.
Leo, you hate democracy? I'm confused here about the
I love
representative democracy. It takes so much effort. I realize my wife is an excellent researcher. I have to admit, I'm far worse. She reads the voter pamphlet. She looks stuff up. She makes determined decisions, and I think I'm quicker to the draw. But
do you just ask So you do what I do. You ask your wife who to vote for.
I often ask my wife because she's done the research on certain school board positions. She's better at ballot measures. I'm better. We often have.
What do you do, Caitlin? You're also in California, faced with a 4 pages of unknown names. What are you going to do?
I'm the researcher. Yeah,
good. Because by trade you are, right?
Yes, exactly. But yeah, it's really important to know what's happening in your state, in your city, neighborhood, if you really care that much, which you probably should. But it's not easy. They definitely don't make it easy to figure out, yes, it's important that people in Congress understand the internet. Like, that's key.
Yeah, that would be a good thing. And judges, yeah.
Judges, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's like the bare minimum these days, and we don't see that.
There's no, I wish there were some quiz that, we gave all the candidates this quiz. What is IP? and then we could see their answers.
Doesn't BuzzFeed have one where you can just go through, you fill out all your positions, and it tells you which candidates on a grid support? That would be great, right? I'm sure those do exist. I am kidding.
I go to Ballotpedia, which I think is a fairly good. It's nonpartisan, right? And I think it does
much information there.
There's a lot of information. Then our local newspaper has a debate and has a forum for candidates and stuff. I'm going to guess it's probably several days. It's probably 30 hours of work for me to figure out who I'm going to vote for. I don't blame people for not wanting to do that.
You are a good citizen. It's really hard to do.
I didn't say I was going to do it. Oh, I told you already. I'm asking my wife.
That's 30 hours
for Lisa.
I will not be doing.
Yeah. Well, but so I understand why you nailed it, Glenn. I am a fan of democracy, and it is hard work. And I don't think the bulk of voters do it. I think they that's why TV ads work. That's why opinion pages and editorials work. People want to be told how to vote.
Yep.
And
getting back to Texas for a minute.
Yes.
And you can understand how, if we're all confused about who to even vote for on these issues, how a court like the Fifth Circuit might be confused or swayed or it's somewhat in the dark as to how they should be considering an issue like an injunction like this. So it should come as no surprise that another circuit court has already held that a similar injunction in Florida should stand.
Right.
So right now we have a conflict, and that is the kind of thing that can involve the Supreme Court even at this injunctive level. So,
yes, but now we don't trust the Supreme Court anymore, so we're screwed.
Clarence Thomas has definitely indicated that he's on, he believes in regulating tech companies as if they were common carriers.
Yes.
He said a bunch of things about Section 230. So yeah, I don't know that taking it to the Supreme Court is really going to result in anything different. But yeah, I think it is important.
For anybody who's not real thrilled with the leaked decision that just came out, that was authored by Justice Alito, and he is the justice in charge of overseeing the Fifth Circuit. So it would go to him. to determine if this is going to stand or not.
So if
and he can decide whether to involve the whole court, or he can just unilaterally decide yes or no.
What do they call that? The secret bench docket? What do they?
Yeah,
the midnight
secret docket. I think it's
the
called.
midnight docket.
Yeah. Shadow.
The shadow docket.
I will say, Kavanaugh, for anything you may think about Kavanaugh, the things he writes about commerce and free speech are more interesting than you would suspect. And I remember particularly because I try to hammer the drum about monopsony, which is the ability for a company to control what price it pays suppliers, essentially, the ability to corner a market on purchasing things. Like Amazon is a monopsony in part. And the new head of that, well, not new now, but the FTC head, I think we're going to talk about that later, Lena Khan, she wrote that great paper that was in part about monopsony and the inability of antitrust laws to affect situations in which the consumer price wasn't the issue. And Kavanaugh has written very interestingly about monopsony and other consumer protection issues. So I don't know. It's what's a mixed bag. Like on certain laws, certain things you're like, well, there's a 6-3 majority now, and others like, well, Roberts is going to shade, and maybe Kavanaugh and maybe now I'm blanking on the fellow who the person who got appointed instead of
Gorsuch.
Gorsuch. Thank you. Didn't want to say the wrong name there, but they might. In previous decisions, there's been 6-3 and 5-4 in which they've been involved.
You're saying that the conservative bloc isn't necessarily predictable when it comes to First Amendment.
I think on a few things, there's been some surprising stuff, or 7-2 decisions, things like that, where you'd be like, you'd think there would be a more. Based on other decisions on sort of, I mean, there's the social progressive side, the progressive and privacy side, and then there's issues that are more mundane that affect commerce, where I think there is still a middle there, led by Roberts, who finds a majority.
There's as the Ken White points out also in this thread. There's, and I'm going to have to defer to you to understand this a little bit better, Denise, but there's language in the bill making it deliberately harder for sites to defend claims, and it made clear that people can keep suing in different Texas courts until a court with authority over all those courts says the law is invalid. Non-mutual issue preclusion and non-mutual claim preclusion are not defenses to an action brought into this section.
Yeah, and because of all the constitutional challenges to this law, they've rapidly added language saying, hey, to the extent any of this law is held unconstitutional, it's severable, and the rest of the law goes into effect.
Wow.
So any court that wants to do away with this law is going to have to do away with the whole thing.
The Texas
pesky parts of it are going to remain.
Texas legislature and the AG are very good now at coming up with ways to circumvent the court, anybody who doesn't agree with them, basically. Wow.
Yeah. I do think there's some interesting
These are good country lawyers. Yeah.
There's some interesting discussions. There's going to be some interesting stuff for the court when it ultimately gets to a court to consider the constitutionality of this. You know, what exactly does it mean to restrict someone's viewpoint? For one thing, that's a little vague. And
well, also vague is 50 million monthly users. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not clear who would. The law does not say who would do the counting.
Right.
So and it's I mean, it would perhaps almost certainly impact Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Wikipedia, and Pinterest. Boy, I'd hate for Wikipedia to be forced to kowtow to this.
Oh, God.
Possibly, but not definitely covered. Twitter, LinkedIn, WordPress, Reddit. They're running the border here. Yelp, TripAdvisor, Discord.
Oh, boy.
Discord could be liable to this.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Tech 875, talking about the suspension of the injunction against a new, apparently unconstitutional law that would declare social media companies as common carriers, and that you could basically not be able to be thrown off for any but very vaguely defined reasons. So, and most importantly, that if you don't feel you're being treated fairly, you can sue for pretty much anything. And you can keep suing and you can keep suing. So in a way, no one really discussed this, but this only applies to companies over 50 million users per month. So in a way, by making things so unmanageable above that point, it could just be a way of saying, hey, you can't have more than 50 million users per month, which in a weird way is kind of something I've been saying is that one of the problems with a lot of our tech companies is scale. That the things that make sense at a small level, or at least are manageable at a small level, like, companies are people and therefore they have free speech and therefore they can do all these things that people can do. And, and when they grow to a scale where they are effectively the common square, they're the environment within which we live, then it's all about their rights and, what they want to do, and not about what the people that are inside their environments want to do. So on that level, this might accidentally do the right thing. On the face of it, it's, it's revenge. It's saying, okay, you want to throw us off of social media. And the real issue is, of course, these are not people that don't have a voice. This is about using the social media platforms to amplify their message. So as we mentioned previously, there's reports that a lot of misinformation on the web around COVID, for example, originates with 12 sources. And the rest is just, all their pundits and bots repeating the message and amplifying it and getting into fights with people over it and stirring up more attention. And in social media, as in a lot of tech companies, it's, getting people angry is what keeps people on the site, which is what companies usually want to do so they can do more advertising. So the net effect is, okay, amplify the worst content on the web because that's what's going to make you angry. And the point at which there was kind of a turning of the tide where this kind of, minority misbehavior was having an outsized influence on violence and control of the country, it's like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. If people are just flat out lying, we're going to cancel their accounts on things that are matters of life and death. And of course, the ones that were used to using the megaphone were very upset by this. And, to the extent they had political power, it's like, okay, we're going to attack you with laws in a way that you're not supposed to do. Laws are not supposed to be against, individual companies or individuals. Similar to Disney using their, freedom of speech that they're granted as a company. I have mixed feelings about that, but, they have freedom of speech to participate in the public discourse. And, when there's certain anti-gay momentum going on in the political circles, they spoke up against it and they said, fine, we're going to cancel your ability to self-rule a district, in violation of the state's agreements with Disney and potentially invoking lots and lots of liability for the state as all the expenses come due that are, caused by the state's action. They have to pay that. So, these improper things, but, it'd be interesting to see if they have a positive result. And as I say, this seems to be written in some aspects in parallel with the anti-abortion stuff going on in Texas prior to the leak of the Supreme Court ruling that, allowed any third party, giving them basically the ability to sue someone that they have no connection with, but on the basis of, well, you helped someone have an abortion. You drove them to the clinic, so we're going to sue you for $10,000 or whatever. And they structured that in a way that, since it wasn't being directly enforced by say the Attorney General for Texas, then it was not something that was appealable, even though it was, on the face of it, pretty unconstitutional, given Roe versus Wade. So they're saying, oh, let's do that with laws, and now we can make unconstitutional laws that aren't fit for appeal because, hey, it's not the state influencing it. We're just simply giving individuals the ability to sue the companies and changing the rules of evidence to make it very, to weight things in their balance and to make it very expensive for the company, and that, you can sue the same company for the same infraction over and over again by simply hopping over to a next venue. And I think at some point you got to say, does it pass the sniff test to say, here's this cookie cutter method for getting around the Constitution, and like the Supreme Court's okay with it? It's like, yeah, totally bypass us. You can make unconstitutional rules all day long as you follow this template. It's like, that's not going to work very well long term for the rule of law. All right. Well, this overall topic does dovetail with something I recently recorded with a guest. So let me go right into that, and we'll talk a little bit about web scraping. You're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. I'm Dave Duncan, and the next topic I wanted to hit on was a story from TechCrunch from April 18th, 2022, called "Web Scraping is Legal, U.S. Appeals Court reaffirms." So just to kind of set the stage here, what is web scraping? Well, we've talked about before how when Facebook first started, and the previous big name in social media was MySpace, one of the ways that it initially got such a strong foothold, or one of the big points in its growth, was when they said, okay, what we're going to do is, you have all your friends and contacts and content on MySpace. We want you to try out this new thing that's, at the time was much cleaner and simpler. And there was a thing called network effects, which means it's hard to get people to change to a new communication system when everyone they know is on a different communication system. And so what they did was like, okay, come use Facebook, give us your credentials for logging into MySpace, and we will, on your behalf, log into your message system, collect all your messages, and deliver them to you in a this nice new clean modern interface of Facebook. And we'll even do if you reply to them, we'll log in again and send those notes to you. And of course, attached to every message will be a note saying, hey, David has now got an account on Facebook. Why don't you join too? And just moving that social graph over from one place to another. So it took what was a data silo and turned it into a target-rich environment for collecting people network by network. It's like, okay, this person comes over, and then all their friends come over, and then all their friends come over, and they killed MySpace pretty quickly that way. Now, it was a death partially of neglect, because it was really noisy, blinky, flashy kind of things going on MySpace, and it was certainly a lot less nervous of an environment on Facebook. But roll it forward to today, and other new little social media things try to start up and try to do the same thing, and they say, no, it's against our terms of service to give your credentials to anyone else and have them automate pulling stuff out, and basically doing all the things we did. Now when the next person tries to do it to us, they're a criminal. And they tried to raise the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, which said basically that doing anything without permission of the computer owner was a felony. And the web was based on these open standards. It's like, okay, part of, the cost of, one of the assumptions, the norm, when you go and put something publicly on the web is it's public. You can't really put a lot of limitations after the fact. It says, well, if you want to play in this open network, then you have to have your stuff be open. And they tried to have their cake and eat it too, and say, well, we want all the interactions with people that comes from being part of an open system, but once we get them on our system, we want to trap them. So in this what they call landmark ruling by the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, it's the latest in a long-running battle brought by LinkedIn aimed at stopping a rival company from web scraping personal information from users' public profiles. The case reached the U.S. Supreme Court last year, but was sent back to the Ninth Circuit for the original appeals court to re-review the case. In its second ruling on Monday, the Ninth Circuit reaffirmed its original decision and found that scraping data that is publicly accessible on the internet is not a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, what constitutes computer hacking under U.S. law. So this is hailed as a major win for archivists, academics, researchers, and journalists who use these tools to mass collect or scrape information that is publicly accessible on the internet. Without this ruling in place, long-running projects to archive websites no longer online and using publicly accessible data for academic and research studies had been left in limbo. So there have been egregious cases of web scraping, such as the facial recognition startup Clearview AI that claimed to have scraped billions of social media profile photos, prompting several tech giants to file lawsuits, including Facebook, Instagram, Parler, Venmo, and Clubhouse. They've all had their users' data scraped over the last few years. And this case was originally brought by LinkedIn against HiQ Labs, a company that uses public data to analyze employee attrition. They said the mass scraping was against its terms of service, amounted to hacking, and was therefore a violation of the CFAA. They lost that case originally in 2019 and found that CFAA does not bar anyone from scraping data that's publicly accessible. So, yeah, this was an interesting case of making essentially the terms of service, the felony law of the land. And this case makes a distinction between people who are authorized to be on a computer and simply aren't doing what you want them to do versus someone who breaks into a system they're not supposed to be on at all. All right, and today I'm going to be discussing this story with James Masnov, a intellectual historian and friend of the show. Hello, James.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good. So, yeah, we were just talking a little bit before the show about this case. It's interesting the kind of interest, the public interest cases, and the private right to control your platform that are kind of in conflict here. What's your kind of first opinion of this?
Well, I'm rather torn on this, to be honest. I'm kind of of two minds about it because, in one sense, I feel like we're at a really important moment in our history where intellectual property has never been more important, and yet squaring off who owns what when it comes to intellectual property has not been more up in the air, and seemingly arbitrary at times. And I'm very much a pro personal property person, IP and otherwise. And so on one hand, I think that the intellectual property that is connected to me as an individual and my identity, I would think that I have some say over. Yet at the same time, I'm a scholar, I'm an academic, and I rely on databases and research in order to, I don't know that I'd ever be scouring Facebook data, for example, but who knows?
Well, there was a case that came to mind recently with Facebook where they were putting out one story about what kind of advertisements they were doing. They had the ad observatory that was trying to study, what is being shown to who, how are demographics being used to manipulate people. And what Facebook self-reported was one thing. And then they created a website plugin so that people visiting Facebook would collect data about what they were seeing, and then they could compare that with what Facebook said they were doing. And Facebook got all up in arms about it being a violation of their users' privacy. And the first reaction was, well, what are you talking about? It's the users that are giving you the data. They're purposely collecting it. But it was kind of slippery weasel speak, because when they were talking about users' privacy, they were talking about their advertisers and their right to, be private in how they were manipulating and lying to people.
Right.
So, it's like they don't know how to say that. They don't want to connect those two concepts, but that's what they were talking about, was the privacy of their advertisers. So
yeah, I don't want to pivot too far into a different story, but it does remind me how right now there are cases of very well-known journalists, I'm using air quotes, journalists, who have complained about being doxxed, and yet the biggest stories that they themselves are putting out right now is when they are doxing other people.
Yes, and doxing is like outing the home address and phone number and email and such of people, right, with the generally with perceived to have the intention of, hey, everybody, harass them. And
right.
I won't tell you to do that, but you know what to do.
Yeah. Okay, so this might help the audience, and it would definitely help me. And I think I'm understanding both sides of the argument, but I feel like I'm probably understanding why this is good for academics and researchers side a little bit more. So would you be able to tell us in your own words what the counter argument is? What would the counter argument to this decision be? Why might this decision?
Well, of course, there is the right to control what's going on your own platform. Mm-hmm. And you have your end user license agreements, and you can well known to throw the kitchen sink in there and do so all sorts of crazy terms. I mean, people have buried call this number to receive a cash reward kind of terms, just to show how little people are looking at them. It took 6 months before anyone collected on that. 6 months where 0 people were seeing and acting on as like, here, just call this number for cash, and it's, so the kind of legal fiction that simply by putting this EULA out there and having someone click on I agree as a the cost of proceeding with whatever it is they're trying to do is actually a contract. It's a meeting of minds at an equal power level, and it just isn't. It's just like, here, I'm offering this to you, and to a large degree, complete freedom in whatever terms I choose to throw in here. Mm-hmm. And some people have tried to do the flip side just to show how ridiculous this polarity is, or to make use of it, saying, by reading this email, you release me on behalf of your employers from any NDAs or end user license agreements that I previously have agreed to, and it's just like, and people are going, well, that's silly. It's like, yeah, it's silly because although we're all supposed to be equal, some of us are more equal than others.
Exactly. It reminds me of, I used to live in Olympia, and I remember going and seeing Ralph Nader speak a number of times. And one of the times he talked about, the next time you go and buy a car, bring a red pen. And when they hand you the contract, just start crossing out the stuff that you don't agree with. I feel like there should be a red pen available to any user agreement. There's like a red pen function that we should have some sort of access to.
Absolutely. I think there should be some normalization and training in high school about reading and modifying contracts, that it's okay. Yes. There's a tyranny of, well, it's written, someone has written a price on a 3x5 card and stuck it in front of their goods, and that's the end of the story. It's like, no, it's until both parties can negotiate until some sale is made. There's some really good books on this. It comes to mind is You Can Negotiate Anything, with great stories of, if you don't just assume that you have to take the deal that you're given, you can cause all sorts of mischief.
Right.
And I do understand the impulse and maybe the necessity to have there be some terms that you have to agree to in order for things to proceed. Like you have to waive your right to prevent any copying that is implicitly necessary in the service. It's like, okay, we've got this data on this server, and now we're moving to a different data set. We don't have to go back and get permission from every person who stored data on our system, to move it within a country or even between countries. They've written that into the EULA. And what I wish there were is more of a template of basic things that are okay to put in a EULA. And if you go beyond that, you actually need to have some sort of meaningful interaction, negotiation that kind of complies with the idea of equal parties meeting. Like, some people have put terms in there saying things like, by using this software, you agree not to work for the Department of Defense or something like that. And it's I'm kind of mixed on that. It's like, yeah, I can understand someone saying, hey, I don't believe, I'm a pacifist and I don't want people that are involved in making war to be using my software. Right. It's tricky. I think, again, this comes back to one of my themes, which is scale matters. And something that you're putting out 5 copies of and something you're putting out 5 billion copies of, there's a difference. When Microsoft Windows makes a change, they are affecting millions of people's lives. They're deciding whether or not they're able to use their computer to give a presentation reliably. For example, they're affecting if someone is able to print documents that they were able to print before, something was done, and no modification was done. And to an unconscionable degree now, I think they use their customers to beta test stuff, the stuff that was
for sure
that we rely on every day. And that's another thing that's changing, right? Is technology is no longer just this optional extra thing that maybe we do sometimes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm really glad that you said that, especially about scale. But I find myself on the outs with really good friends of mine and colleagues I have tremendous respect for. And some of them are, like serious lefties, and some of them are like libertarian types. And I find myself in disagreement with both of them, both of those camps, a fair amount of time, because I feel like a lot of the time they don't appreciate something that you just said, which is that, the scalability of something, the measure, the matter of scale is of supreme importance. And to me, a matter of degrees is a matter of everything. That's the distinction. That I'm a first principles person. I really am. And so I really admire people who are principled, but they act like that approaches and methods don't change when the scale changes. But as you well know, because you just pointed this out, that changes everything.
Yeah, if an Apple vendor sets certain rules inside his establishment, that's I consider that a reasonable freedom for him. It's like he says, hey, I'm not dealing with people that aren't wearing shoes or shirts or whatever. The old no shoes, no shirt, no service.
Right.
And when everyone lives inside the environment you're creating, you're not just setting the standards for your house. You're effectively changing what the society is doing.
Absolutely. You also made me think of something when we were talking about when a sort of simple technological change might happen. It might be one little thing on a product you use. So I'm a Windows person. I've used Office forever. It's kind of standard for historians to use that stuff.
Yeah, network effect again. It's like other historians use it, so you got to use it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't use the cloud. I never have. To me, the cloud is somebody else's computer.
Yeah.
And I will back up my stuff onto my own external hard drive and things like that. And then I save to my PC and then I back it up. But one of the changes that Microsoft did, I don't know, a couple of years ago maybe, is that if you change so the default on the newer Office newer versions of Office, the default is to use the cloud.
Yep.
And so if you change this, if you change the setting to default to save to your PC, it doesn't auto save anymore. So I'm a writer and I'm constantly writing. And if I don't remember to manually save my document, it won't auto save. It's like I'm being punished for not using their cloud.
Yes, it's a very petulant move. It's like, well, you don't want to use our cloud? Fine. Well, you'll regularly lose your documents.
Right. It's pretty crazy.
The cloud went from something that was an interesting feature that not everyone had figured out how to even do right. And it's gone from that to being like, oh, you have to use the cloud. And it's the Apple environment was, generally pretty privacy respecting, not, I think, out of great virtue, but simply that was okay. We're going to distinguish ourselves in the market,
right, by
not, co-opting your data as strongly as the other companies do. And now they've switched, like everyone else, to say, well, you really need to be using the cloud. That's the answer to everything. It's like, you want to transfer your data from one device to another. Well, you got to just store it to the cloud.
Can you explain that to me? Because here's what I don't understand, and I'm trying to look at this in a way that is not cynical, and I'm having trouble with this. So I'd be interested in your answer here.
Devil's advocate mode. Okay.
Well, perhaps, but over time, our ability to save more and more data on hard devices has become much better. We can store and save more and more data.
Yep.
In smaller and smaller formats and devices, right? Yep. Which to me would mean that the cloud idea is less and less important over time.
To us.
To us, exactly. So, but that's where my cynicism comes in. Is like, is that cynical or is that just realistic? Be like, okay, the cloud is a benefit to these tech producers. It's not all that beneficial to the consumer at all.
It is beneficial to a certain type of consumer.
Okay.
I think there is the one area where I'd say their interest is legitimate is in herding everyone towards one solution that is easier for them to maintain. One of the things that jumped out at me about Windows 10 is that was the point at which Microsoft dubbed themselves your rather arrogant system administrator. And, they were going to tell you when your computer was going to update, and they were going to tell you when you had to take a break. And, it's just like they were just going to set the rules. Oh, we've decided you're using a different browser now. We've decided some features are going to go away, and they just do it. And like you have no say in it at all. You don't know enough to comment on their grand designs. And they always have some lofty vision they're selling that what they want to do is necessary. And that is where I think it really hits the skids is, they're trying to make a case that this thing has to be a certain way. And we have a whole history, in your other vocation of it not being that way. And that, all this stuff works perfectly fine if you save it on your own. There are some collaboration features that are easier to do when you have something in the cloud, but not everything you do is a collaboration. And one of the principles that I espouse that I don't see used very often, and I think we need to think of it more both legislatively, regulation, and just as good business practice, is don't take onto yourself a bunch of data that profoundly affects other people if it gets abused, and then look surprised when it gets abused because you collected it all in one place and you didn't defend it proportional to its value. So, to the degree someone is not going to, go around and break into 1 million households and steal their hard drives. But if you put all their personal data in a central location on the cloud and one programmer makes a mistake, you can bet people are going to be hoovering up that data. And right now there is no liability. I think that's another reason why things have gone so strongly to the cloud is there is no liability for when they mess up. Other people pay the price and they get all the benefit of all the data they can correlate. And, it's not all just so they can steal your data and sell it to people. It's also so they can give you, products, figure out what products you're willing to buy and change their monetization strategy. I mean, I was, kind of livid when the Adobe Creative Suite stuff became something that was just you subscribe to. You couldn't buy the software. It always belonged to them. And software is a force amplifier. It's a productivity amplifier. And when they said you can't buy this and you're always just going to rent it from us, what they were saying was all the benefits of technological progress, whether we made them or not, is going to go to us. And you're going to pay for it just as if humans were doing the work for you. But humans aren't doing it. It's just a program that you could own just as easily as them. And, they're leveraging their position at the money spigot to say, well, you're going to pay for stuff that, in a way that they are not paying.
Right. Well, it sounds to me like my cynicism is not entirely unfounded.
No, it's simply a matter of, it comes back to humans don't change. More power is better, right? So they're going to gravitate towards more, even when ultimately it's bad for them, bad for their customers. We have the same problem, I think, at a national security level, where we have our intelligence agencies are more interested in finding flaws that they can use for sexy exploits of the enemy, and to get all the data, rather than thinking, by leaving that flaw open, we're making it much more likely that crime will happen. Mm-hmm. It's like having a building code where everything must be made out of balsa wood so that the police can't be locked out of places. But this means criminals are going to be coming into places a lot more than they would otherwise.
I actually thought you were going to say that the compromise of the national security state in terms of its relationships with big tech, such as Google and Amazon. That's where I thought you were going to go with that.
Well, that's another factor, I think, also that sort of, stretches ethics to say, you have very clear lines on, in some places on what private companies are allowed to do and what governments are allowed to do. They each have their own limitations. And by partnering together, they think they're oh so clever that they've gotten this workaround. It's like, well, we can't collect data on people, but we sure don't mind if you collect all their data and then sell it to us. And
Right.
again, they have sort of betrayed the people they're supposed to be serving by putting them in a more vulnerable position in order to have some extra power, when their supposed goals might be better served by having less power, but having a more secure infrastructure. And so there's less to guard.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I don't remember the name of the program. It was in the pre-9/11 days. This was during the Clinton administration. There was a program between the US and the UK, which was, well, we're not allowed to spy on our own citizens, and you aren't allowed to spy on your own citizens. So we'll spy on you, and you spy on us, and then we'll share the information.
Yeah, that's the Five Eyes alliance of Canada and US and UK and New Zealand and I think Australia. They all said, yeah, we can spy on each other's citizens and then send the information. And anything interesting we'll send back to you. And where something interesting grows.
Right. It seems like now it's more and more that it's a combination of states and corporations doing that. But we've talked about this before. It's like the CNN network. It's all just corporations at some point.
Right. Yeah. When you have transnational corporations that live nowhere, then they answer to no one.
Yeah.
Well, this has been another excellent discussion, James. Thank you so much for coming on. And I'll just remind people we're talking to James Masnov, and hit us with your website.
Historykillers.com.
Excellent. I hope you'll continue to join these conversations next Wednesday and every Wednesday, noon to 1 o'clock, for Northwest Tech Show.